Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, we have an astonishing tale that unfolds in the seemingly peaceful town of Riverton. But beneath the surface of manicured lawns and friendly faces, prejudice can strike like a viper. Get ready for a gripping story about a young man, a biased accusation, and a mother's unwavering strength. But before we dive in, don't forget to smash that like button if you're excited for this story. And if you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss out on more thrilling narratives. Now, let's get started. Riverton, a town nestled amidst rolling hills and whispering willows, often felt like a place suspended in time. The pace of life was gentle, almost a lullaby, where neighbors exchanged warm smiles and the aroma of freshly baked pies wafted from open windows. On this particular Saturday afternoon, the sun, a benevolent artist, painted the streets with strokes of gold, creating an idyllic scene that seemed untouched by the hurried world outside. However, beneath the veneer of tranquility, shadows lurked, biases simmered, and perceptions could be as sharp and cutting as shards of glass. For Todrick Hall, this Saturday held a special promise. He had a mission: to find the perfect birthday gift for his little sister, Aaliyah. Aaliyah was turning 10, a milestone Todrick knew she was eagerly anticipating. He wanted to give her something unforgettable, a tangible symbol of his love and pride. He imagined her face lighting up, her eyes sparkling like the very jewels he intended to buy. Todrick, a young black man with a warm smile and an easy laugh that could fill a room, was a vibrant thread in the fabric of Riverton. He was known for his kindness, his infectious energy, and his unwavering loyalty to his friends, especially Taylor Swift, his best friend since childhood. Taylor, a global pop superstar, was his confidant, his sister from another mother, and his staunchest supporter. Their bond was a testament to shared dreams, mutual respect, and a love that transcended fame and fortune. But today, he was simply a big brother on a quest. He'd spent months squirreling away every dollar he could from his job at Parker's Coffee House, a local haunt where he whipped up lattes and served smiles alongside caffeine. Each tip, each paycheck, was carefully allocated to his Aaliyah fund. He'd finally saved enough to purchase the coveted silver charm bracelet from Belmont Jewelers, the most prestigious establishment in town. It was a place usually reserved for the town's elite, a sparkling haven of diamonds and gold. As he walked down Main Street, Todrick felt a knot of anticipation tighten in his stomach. Belmont Jewelers was only a block away. He adjusted the strap of his messenger bag, a familiar weight against his shoulder. The bag held his carefully saved cash, the physical embodiment of his dedication. This wasn't just a purchase. It was a statement, a declaration of his love for Aaliyah. He paused before the store, admiring the polished glass windows that reflected the sun's rays like 1,000 tiny diamonds. The displays were breathtaking. Necklaces that shimmered like captured starlight, rings that whispered of timeless elegance, and bracelets that beckoned with their delicate charm. He spotted it immediately, the silver charm bracelet. It was even more exquisite than he had imagined. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the heavy brass handle and pulled open the door. A delicate chime echoed through the store, announcing his arrival. The air inside was cool and hushed, a stark contrast to the warmth of the street outside. The scent of expensive perfume and polished wood hung in the air. The interior of Belmont Jewelers was a symphony of opulence. Sleek glass display cases lined the walls, filled with rows of gleaming gold and silver jewelry. Soft, diffused lighting illuminated every facet, every sparkle. The customers were mostly well-dressed, older women, their fingers adorned with diamond rings that caught the light with every movement. Their voices, hushed and refined, created a low hum of polite conversation. Todrick tried to ignore the curious glances he received as he walked further into the store. He knew he didn't quite fit the typical Belmont Jewelers clientele. His jeans and casual t-shirt stood in contrast to the elegant attire of the other shoppers. But he held his head high, his focus locked on the bracelet he had come to buy. Behind the counter stood Margaret Whitmore, a middle-aged white woman with carefully coiffed blonde hair and sharp, assessing eyes. Her expression was initially neutral, almost bored, as she idly polished a silver locket. But the moment her gaze landed on Todrick, something shifted. Her lips pressed into a thin, almost imperceptible line, and a flicker of suspicion clouded her eyes. Todrick felt that shift instantly, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. It was a familiar feeling, one he had encountered countless times before. It was the silent question, the unspoken judgment that seemed to follow him into places where people thought he didn't belong. He approached the counter, offering a polite smile. "I'd like to see that one, please," he said, pointing to the silver charm bracelet displayed in the case. His voice was steady and calm, the way his mother, Taylor Swift, had always taught him to speak when dealing with situations like this. "The one with the little stars." Margaret didn't immediately respond. She simply folded her arms across her chest, tilting her head slightly, as if scrutinizing him. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice dripping with a subtle condescension. "That one's quite expensive." Todrick's stomach tightened, but he maintained his composure. He reached into his messenger bag, pulling out his wallet and carefully extracting the neatly folded cash. He placed it on the counter, a tangible demonstration of his intentions. "I'm sure," he said firmly. "I have the money right here." Margaret's eyes flicked to the cash, her lips curling slightly, as if the sight of it somehow offended her. She seemed to tense up even more, her fingers twitching nervously near the phone resting on the counter. Instead of reaching for the bracelet, she let out a low, almost amused scoff. "And where, exactly, did you get all that money?" she asked, her voice deceptively casual, but the accusation beneath it as sharp as a shard of glass. Todrick met Margaret's gaze, his expression unwavering. He was accustomed to these subtle challenges, these veiled attempts to undermine his dignity. He understood that his presence in this store, as a young, black man, was already a transgression in her eyes. "I work at Parker's coffee house down the street," he explained calmly, his voice clear and steady. "I've been saving up for a few months. It's for my little sister's birthday." Margaret's eyes narrowed, her skepticism palpable. "Parker's coffee house, huh? That doesn't seem like the kind of job that pays enough to afford a bracelet like that." She paused, letting her words hang in the air, heavy with implication. "Are you sure you didn't find it somewhere?" Todrick clenched his jaw, fighting back a surge of frustration. He had anticipated this, the suspicion, the subtle accusations. He knew he had to remain calm, to prove her wrong with his composure and his honesty. "I earned every penny," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "I can provide references from my employer if you'd like." Margaret seemed momentarily taken aback by his directness. She hesitated, her eyes darting around the store as if gauging the reactions of the other customers. Finally, with a sigh that suggested she was doing him a great favor, she reached into the display case and retrieved the silver charm bracelet. "Be careful with it," she said, her voice laced with a warning. "It's very delicate." She placed the bracelet on a small velvet pad on the counter, her eyes never leaving Todrick's face. Todrick's heart skipped a beat as he gazed at the bracelet. It was even more beautiful up close. The silver gleamed softly under the store's lighting, and the tiny star-shaped charm sparkled with an ethereal glow. He could already picture Aaliyah's face, her eyes wide with delight as she fastened it around her wrist. He reached out to touch it, his fingers brushing against the cool, smooth metal. He was so engrossed in admiring the bracelet that he didn't notice his hand had begun to tremble slightly. His nerves were getting the better of him. This whole experience was unsettling. Suddenly, his fingers slipped. The bracelet slid from his grasp, falling to the floor with a soft, barely audible clink. In that instant, everything changed. Margaret Whitmore's eyes widened, her face contorting with a mixture of shock and outrage. A high-pitched shriek escaped her lips, shattering the hushed atmosphere of the store. "Thief!" she screamed, her voice piercing. "He's trying to steal it. I knew it. I knew he was up to no good." The bracelet slid from his grasp, falling to the floor with a soft, barely audible clink. In that instant, everything changed. Margaret Whitmore's eyes widened, her face contorting with a mixture of shock and outrage. A high-pitched shriek escaped her lips, shattering the hushed atmosphere of the store. "Thief!" she screamed, her voice piercing. "He's trying to steal it. I knew it. I knew he was up to no good." Every head in the room turned toward them. Todrick's eyes widened. "Wait." Margaret jabbed a finger at him, her face twisted in outrage. "I knew you were up to something. You were trying to pocket it, weren't you? Thought you'd get away with it." Todrick's stomach dropped. "What? No, I..." Margaret lunged for the store phone, her fingers dialing frantically. "Get the police here now," she barked into the receiver. "We've got a thief, young black male, hoodie, tried to steal from us." Todrick stood frozen, the weight of her words slamming into him like a freight train. The room had gone silent, but the air was thick with something heavy: judgment, suspicion, fear. He could feel the eyes of every customer drilling into him, the way their postures shifted, the way a woman clutched her purse a little tighter. His mind screamed at him to say something, to defend himself, but he knew. He knew no one in that room would believe him, not over her. Then, in the distance, the wail of approaching sirens pierced the air. The sirens grew louder, an eerie wail slicing through the once quiet afternoon. Todrick felt his pulse hammer against his ribs as the weight of the moment crashed down on him. He had known this could happen. He had seen it before, on the news, in whispered conversations, in the fear that crept into his mother's voice whenever she reminded him to be careful when he left the house. But knowing it could happen and living it were two entirely different things. His breath was tight in his chest, his fingers twitching by his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to run, to fight back against the blatant lies spilling from Margaret's lips, but he did none of those things. He stood still, forcing himself to breathe, because anything else, any sudden movement, any misplaced word, could make this worse. Margaret's voice was sharp and commanding as she spoke into the phone, her free hand still clutching the counter as though she were the victim in all of this. "Yes, right now. I need officers at Belmont Jewelers immediately. He's still here. He's trying to deny it, but I caught him red-handed." Her eyes flicked to Todrick, her lips curling into a smirk of pure satisfaction, like she had been waiting for this moment, like she had been expecting it. "And hurry," she added, lowering her voice just enough to sound urgent. "He's getting aggressive." Todrick's stomach lurched. His fists clenched at his sides. Aggressive? He had barely spoken. He hadn't even moved yet. She was painting a picture that everyone in the room was more than willing to believe. He could feel it in the way the other customers backed away, their gazes shifting between him and Margaret, none of them questioning her words. A woman in a floral dress pulled her purse closer. An older man in a suit shook his head as though this was nothing more than confirmation of what he already assumed to be true. Todrick swallowed hard, glancing at the bracelet on the floor, the same one that had slipped from his fingers only moments ago, now a symbol of something far more dangerous. He took a shaky breath and looked Margaret dead in the eyes. "I didn't steal anything," he said, his voice low, controlled, but laced with barely restrained fury. "You know that." Margaret scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. "Oh, please, don't play innocent now. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? But I know you're kind." She spat the last words with thinly veiled disgust, her gaze flicking to his hoodie, his jeans, the sneakers on his feet. "You walk in here looking around like you belong, but the moment I turn my back, you think you can help yourself. I see it all the time." The words tasted bitter in his mouth. He didn't have to ask what she meant. He already knew. Margaret shrugged, feigning innocence. "What? You're acting all offended now? I'm just stating the facts. Stores like this deal with thieves every day, and I don't need to guess which ones are the problem." Todrick felt something snap inside him, something cold and sharp and suffocating. He wanted to scream, to tell her how wrong she was, how disgusting, how vile, but the words choked in his throat. It wouldn't matter. Nothing he said would matter because, in Margaret's eyes, in the eyes of everyone watching, he was already guilty. The store's glass doors swung open with a rush of air, and two uniformed police officers stormed in. The room shifted, the energy crackling like a live wire. Conversations died instantly, and suddenly all attention was on Todrick. "There he is," Margaret cried, pointing at him like he was some fugitive off a wanted poster. "That's him. He tried to steal from me." Todrick barely had time to react before one of the officers, a tall, burly man with graying hair, his badge reading Sergeant Blake, took a step toward him, already reaching for his handcuffs. "Sir, I need you to put your hands where I can see them." Todrick's breath caught. His fingers twitched at his sides, but he didn't move. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to run, to protect himself, but he forced himself to stay still. Blake's tone sharpened. "I said, hands where I can see them." "I didn't do anything," Todrick said, his voice steadier than he felt. Margaret let out an exaggerated scoff. Are you seriously going to stand there and argue after I caught you? After you. She gestured wildly toward the bracelet on the floor. Tried to pocket that? The nerve of you people. Todrick flinched. You people. The second officer, a younger man with sharp eyes, Officer Doyle, hesitated. His gaze flicked between Todrick and Margaret and the discarded bracelet. Unlike Blake, he wasn't moving in immediately. Todrick noticed the flicker of doubt in his expression. Doyle wasn't completely convinced, but it didn't matter. Blake was already stepping closer, handcuffs at the ready, his face void of hesitation. Son, I'm going to need you to step outside. Todrick felt his pulse hammering against his skull. His breathing was shallow. His mind raced through the worst possible outcomes, and every single one ended the same way. With him on the ground, with someone shouting, with a headline that started with "Black Teen Arrested After Attempted Theft." He knew how these stories played out. Margaret's smirk widened, her arms crossing tighter over her chest, her posture relaxed. She thinks she's already won. Todrick exhaled sharply, forcing his voice to remain calm. Call my mother. Blake scoffed, shaking his head. Kid, you can make your phone call at the station. No, Todrick said, firmer now, his voice carrying through the store. Call my mother now. Margaret rolled her eyes. Oh, sure, let him call Mommy, she said sarcastically. And who is she? A public defender? Some activist? What's she going to do? Tell you to scream for justice? She let out a dry, humorless laugh. Todrick ignored her. He reached into his pocket, not fast, not sudden, just enough to take out his phone. He dialed with steady hands. Mom, I need you at Belmont Jewelers now. Blake's brows furrowed slightly, but he still didn't seem concerned. Doyle, however, shifted. He must have noticed something in Todrick's voice. The way he wasn't begging or pleading, the way he wasn't panicking despite the danger he was in. No, Todrick wasn't afraid. He was waiting. Minutes stretched like hours. The air in the store was thick, the tension palpable. Margaret tapped her foot impatiently. Blake sighed, his grip on the handcuffs loosening only slightly. Doyle checked his watch. The customers had mostly backed away, whispering to each other, some pulling out their phones. And then, the door swung open. A woman walked in, tall, commanding, the kind of presence that made an entire room fall silent. A navy blue suit hugged her frame. Her heels clicked against the tile with precision, and her sharp eyes scanned the scene before her. She held up a badge, flashing it with an authority that left no room for doubt. I'm Taylor Swift, she announced, her voice cutting through the room like steel. Chief of Police for Riverton PD. She turned her gaze, locking onto Blake. And this, she said, gesturing to Todrick, is my son. The room went dead silent for a long, agonizing moment. The room went dead silent for a long, agonizing moment. The store was silent. The weight of Taylor Swift's words pressed down on everyone in the room, suffocating and inescapable. Todrick barely breathed, watching as recognition dawned on the officers' faces. Blake stiffened first, his grip on the handcuffs faltering, his body suddenly not as sure, not as dominant. Doyle, who had already shown hesitance, exhaled sharply, his posture shifting in a way that suggested he was calculating his next move carefully. But it was Margaret who reacted the most violently. Her expression contorted, the smirk vanishing in an instant, replaced by something ugly, shock, anger, desperation. She blinked hard, as if hoping she had misheard, as if refusing to accept that this young black man, whom she had so easily condemned, was the son of a woman who outranked every single person in that room. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Chief Carter, she stammered, her voice no longer carrying the same venom, now laced with something dangerously close to panic. Taylor Swift didn't so much as glance at her. Her eyes remained on Blake, piercing, unwavering. Sergeant, she said, her voice even, measured, but carrying a dangerous undercurrent. I assume you have a reasonable explanation for why my son is standing here surrounded while you reach for your handcuffs before I arrived. Blake swallowed hard, his face paling. Chief Swift, with all due respect, we received a call about a possible theft in progress. This woman, he gestured weakly toward Margaret, identified Mr. Hall as the suspect. A possible theft? Taylor repeated, her voice dripping with ice. So, you apprehended him based solely on the word of this woman, without any evidence whatsoever? She paused, letting her words hang in the air. Did you even bother to investigate? Did you find any stolen merchandise on his person? Did you interview any other witnesses? Or did you simply see a young black man in a hoodie and make a snap judgment? Blake shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze. We were just following procedure, Chief. We had to respond to the call. Procedure, Taylor echoed, her lips curling into a scornful smile. Is that what you call it? Because it sounds a lot like racial profiling to me. She turned her attention to Officer Doyle. Officer, what's your take on this situation? Doyle straightened, meeting her gaze directly. Chief, when we arrived, Mr. Hall was calm and cooperative. He requested to call his mother, which we allowed. I had reservations about the arrest based on the lack of concrete evidence. Taylor nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. Thank you, officer. Your honesty is appreciated. She turned back to Blake, her expression hardening. Sergeant, I'm relieving you of duty, effective immediately. Turn in your badge and your weapon. I'll be expecting a full report on my desk first thing Monday morning. In the meantime, I suggest you consult the department's policy on proper arrest procedure and racial sensitivity training. Blake's face was ashen. He opened his mouth to protest, but one look at Taylor's unwavering gaze silenced him. He slowly unbuckled his belt, removing his weapon and badge. The sound of the metal hitting the floor echoed through the silent store. Taylor turned her attention to Margaret, her eyes narrowing. And as for you, Ms. Whitmore, she said, her voice low and dangerous, I believe we have a great deal to discuss. Taylor Swift turned towards Todrick, and the icy demeanor instantly melted away, replaced by the warm, comforting smile he had known his entire life. She walked over to him, gently cupping his face in her hands. Are you all right, Todrick? She asked softly, her eyes searching his for any sign of distress. Todrick managed a weak smile. I'm okay, Mom. Just shaken up. Taylor pulled him into a tight embrace, holding him close for a moment. I'm so sorry you had to go through this, she whispered in his ear. I promise you, this will not stand. She released him and turned back to Margaret, her expression hardening once more. Ms. Whitmore, she said, her voice laced with steel, I intend to fully investigate this incident. If I find that you acted out of prejudice or malice, I will ensure that you face the full consequences of your actions. That may include criminal charges. Margaret's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. Chief Swift, please, I didn't mean any harm. I was just being cautious. Cautious, Taylor repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call falsely accusing an innocent person of a crime? Is that what you call treating someone differently because of the color of their skin? She shook her head in disgust. Your caution is nothing more than blatant discrimination, and it has no place in this town. Taylor gestured to Officer Doyle. Officer, please escort Ms. Whitmore to my office. I'll be there shortly to take her statement. Doyle nodded and gently guided Margaret towards the door. As they walked past Todrick, Margaret cast a pleading look in his direction, but Todrick simply turned away. Once Margaret was gone, Taylor turned back to the remaining customers in the store. I apologize for the disturbance, she said, her voice regaining its composure. I assure you that the Riverton Police Department is committed to serving and protecting all members of this community, regardless of their race or background. We will not tolerate discrimination of any kind. The customers murmured their agreement, their faces a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Some even offered Todrick apologetic smiles, which he politely returned. Taylor picked up the silver charm bracelet from the floor, carefully examining it. This is a beautiful piece, she said, turning to Todrick. Is this the one you wanted for Aaliyah? Todrick nodded, his eyes lighting up slightly. Yes, it is. Taylor smiled and handed him the bracelet. Then let's buy it. And don't let anyone make you feel ashamed or unwelcome in this town. Riverton belongs to you just as much as it belongs to anyone else. Todrick accepted the bracelet, his heart swelling with gratitude. He knew that Taylor's words were more than just empty platitudes. She was a woman of action, and she would do everything in her power to ensure that what happened to him today would never happen again. As they walked towards the cash register, Todrick couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. He had been wronged, he had been humiliated, but he had also been defended by someone who loved him and believed in him. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The story concludes with the promise of consequences for Margaret's actions and a sense of relief and vindication for Todrick, with the implication that Taylor Swift will make sure such a thing never occurs again to her friends, family, or other victims in Riverdale. That's a wrap on the story of Todrick. I hope you enjoyed this dramatic tale and found it engaging. If you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps me know what kind of content you're enjoying. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories, rewrites, and creative content. Your support means the world. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.